A pilot crashes in the Sahara Desert. Sand stretching endless. Heat pressing down. He's alone, certain he might die. And then, out of nowhere, a small golden-haired boy appears and says, "Please, draw me a sheep." At first glance, you'd think you've stumbled into a fairy tale, or maybe some forgotten science fiction fable. But no, The Little Prince is neither. It's not about rockets, not about lasers, not about war among the stars. It's about something smaller, softer, and far more dangerous. It's about what it means to see with your heart when the world keeps telling you to look with your eyes. This book has quietly sold over 200 million copies. It's been translated into more than 500 languages and dialects, making it one of the most widely read works in human history. And yet, when you pick it up, it feels so fragile. Barely 100 pages, illustrated with childlike drawings. It looks like something you'd read aloud at bedtime. And yet, time and again, it's adults who walk away shaken. Why? Why does this slim story about a boy from a tiny asteroid hit harder at 40 than at 10? Why has it traveled further than most sacred texts, crossing cultures, wars, generations? That's what I want to sit with tonight. Not just the story itself, but the strange, aching way it whispers to us. I don't know if you're listening in your car, or while cooking, or lying in bed letting your eyes slip closed. However you've arrived here, I invite you, slow down. Because The Little Prince is a book that doesn't shout, it waits. So let's go to the desert. Let's meet the boy. And let's remember what we once knew and perhaps forgot. The pilot, our narrator, crashes alone. He's desperate, thirsty, already calculating how many days he can last with what little water remains. And then, this boy appears, neither frightened nor urgent, simply asking for a sheep. Not water, not rescue, a sheep. There's something unsettling in that request. It's innocent, yes, but also insistent. A child who doesn't explain himself, who doesn't apologize for being strange. He assumes you'll understand. And when you don't, when you hesitate, he just asks again. The pilot draws. First, a clumsy picture. The boy shakes his head. Another, still wrong. Finally, out of exhaustion, the pilot draws a box. The sheep you want is inside. And the boy beams. Somehow, that simple sketch satisfies him. Already the book is teaching us. Children accept imagination where adults demand precision. A box is enough. A symbol is enough. Grown-ups would have asked for measurements, breeds, weight, proof. The Little Prince only needs belief. I find myself thinking, how many boxes have I dismissed because I wanted to see the sheep inside? How many times has someone offered me a symbol, a gesture, and I demanded more detail, more evidence, missing the gift entirely? That's the first sting of this book. It doesn't wait long. From here, the prince begins telling his story. He comes from a tiny planet, an asteroid called B612, barely bigger than a house. He tends to volcanoes there, sweeping out their craters like fireplaces. He watches sunsets by shifting his chair a few steps, over and over, sometimes 40 times a day. And most important, he has left behind a rose. Not just any rose. A fragile, proud, beautiful, difficult rose. the only one of its kind on his planet. She is vain, demanding, often unkind, and yet he loves her. Loves her enough to miss her even as he leaves. Loves her enough to carry her in every conversation. That detail matters, because this isn't a fairy tale about planets. It's about how love both wounds and defines us. The rose is special not because she's perfect, but because he has cared for her. That difference is crucial. Love is not about possession. It's about presence. And yet, when he leaves, he's not sure. He feels tricked, confused, hurt by her thorns and her pride. He wonders if he should love her at all. And so, like many of us when faced with doubt, he runs. He leaves. He wanders.
He visits other planets, and on each planet, he meets an adult. But not just any adult, an exaggerated version, a caricature. A king with no subjects, giving pointless orders. A drunkard who drinks to forget his shame, then drowns deeper in it. A businessman counting stars he claims to own, too busy to look at them. Each adult is absurd, but the absurdity hides a knife. Because if we're honest, we recognize them. We see ourselves in their foolishness. The king, obsessed with power, but ruling nothing. The drunk, lost in cycles of shame. The businessman, tallying numbers without joy. These are not fairy tale villains. They're us, if we're not careful. And as the prince tells his stories, the pilot, the narrator, starts realizing what's happening. This boy is holding up a mirror for the adults who forgot how to see. I pause here because this is where the book begins to reveal its trick. It's not for children at all. It's for grown-ups, camouflaged as a children's tale so that maybe, just maybe, we'd let our guard down enough to listen. And it works. Because the moment you relax, you realize the child isn't just speaking to the pilot. He's speaking to you. We'll sit with the fox soon, because the fox has the line that makes this book immortal. But before we get there, I want to acknowledge something. The Little Prince unsettles me not because it's whimsical, but because it's so matter-of-fact about loneliness. The pilot is alone in the desert. The prince is alone on his planet. Every adult he meets is alone on theirs. The book whispers what we know but rarely say. Grown-up life is isolating. And that loneliness is why the sheep matters. It's why the rose matters. It's why the fox matters. Because the cure for isolation isn't knowledge or power or ownership. It's relationship. So let's end part 1 here, with the boy, the pilot, and a sheep in a box. Strange, maybe even silly. But if you lean in, you'll realize the sheep is the door. The box is the opening. And behind it waits the fox. When we return, we'll meet the fox and learn why the line, "What is essential is invisible to the eye," has stayed alive for 80 years. The Little Prince, Part 2. We return to the desert. The sheep still waits in its box. The rose still lingers in the prince's memory. And now, the fox appears. If the Little Prince has one heartbeat, one moment that people carry in their pockets long after they close the book, it's this. The boy asks to play. The The fox declines. Not yet. I am not tamed, the fox says. That word, tame, sounds wrong at first. It sounds like control, like ownership. But the fox explains, to tame is not to dominate. It is to create ties, to be responsible for someone, and to let someone be responsible for you. The fox tells him, right now, you are just another little boy to me, no different from 100 others. And I am just another fox to you, no different from 100 others. But if you tame me, and I tame you, then we will become unique to one another. When you laugh, I will think of fields of wheat, golden like your hair. When I see the stars, I will remember your rose. This is where the book tilts. Because until now, the prince has been searching, wandering, trying to understand. But the fox shows him what he already knew but couldn't name. Love is not about being rare or perfect. It's about attention, time, care. One sees clearly only with the heart. What is essential is invisible to the eye. You've heard it quoted on mugs, posters, Instagram captions. But here, in the quiet, it feels heavier. Because the fox is not just being poetic. He's telling the truth we spend most of adulthood dodging. I'll confess something. The first time I read this, I was young enough to nod without really grasping it. It sounded nice, a little sentimental maybe. But rereading as an adult, it hit different. Because by then, I'd lost things. People I loved, friendships that faded. And suddenly, the line wasn't abstract
anymore. It was lived. The most important things in my life weren't visible on the surface. They were in memories, hours spent, laughter repeated, invisible, but essential. The fox insists, it's the time you spent with your rose that makes her special. Not her beauty, not her uniqueness, not even her fragility, only the time. This cuts through a modern lie we tell ourselves, that value comes from rarity, or achievement, or perfection. The fox whispers, no, value comes from love, from investment, from attention given freely. I think about this every time I scroll through endless things, endless people, endless distractions. All of them blur together until I've chosen, tamed, one. Only then does it matter. Only then does it become irreplaceable. And here's where the tragedy enters again. Because the fox warns him, taming brings risk. If you tame me, you will cry when I leave. If you tame me, you'll carry that ache. And still, the fox begs to be tamed. That paradox is almost unbearable. Love guarantees loss. Relationship guarantees vulnerability. The fox knows it. The prince feels it. And still, they choose it. I don't know about you, but I flinch at this. Because I want the reward without the risk. I want the closeness without the ache. And yet, every deep bond in my life has carried both. The fox doesn't let us look away. Let me read the line again, slowly. One sees clearly only with the heart. What is essential is invisible to the eye. It's almost cruel in its simplicity, because our eyes are trained from childhood to measure, to compare, to evaluate. And the fox is saying, the truth that matters most can't be measured at all. It's invisible when you first fall in love, when you first trust someone, when you first sit quietly with a friend. Nothing visible changes. The room looks the same, but something essential is shifted. And later, when you lose them,
Nothing visible changes either. The room still looks the same, but everything essential has collapsed. That's why this line has stayed alive for 80 years. Not because it's clever, but because every person who's ever loved and lost reads it and thinks, yes, that's it. That's what I couldn't say. The prince begins to understand. His rose is not just one among thousands. She is his, because of the time, because of the care, because of the invisible threads between them. This is the moment where his wandering turns into longing, where the story shifts from satire of adults to confession of love. He realizes he cannot forget her. He cannot dismiss her flaws. She is essential. And for us, as readers or listeners, the fox becomes the voice we wish we had at our lowest. The voice that says, yes, it will hurt. Yes, you will grieve. But love is worth it. Better to ache from taming than to stay untouched and alone. I once knew someone who said, I don't get attached. It's easier that way. And for a while I envied them. They seemed lighter, freer. But the older I get, the more I realize that's not freedom. That's starvation. The fox would say, to refuse attachment is to refuse seeing at all. The prince tames the fox, and when it's time to leave, the fox weeps. But he's glad too, because now wheat fields will remind him of golden hair. The ache is proof of love. The sadness is proof of connection. And here, Saint-Exupéry gives us the book's gift and its wound at once. Love guarantees memory. Memory guarantees loss. But loss also guarantees meaning. Without the ache, nothing mattered. With the ache, everything did. We'll stop here, for now, with the boy carrying the fox's words in his heart, already feeling the tug toward his rose, because the fox's wisdom is not abstract anymore. It's a call back to the flower he left behind, fragile and proud and essential. Next, we'll step behind the curtain a little. We'll look not only at the story, but at the author himself, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. A pilot, an exile, a man who wrote this book while grieving, while longing, while knowing he might not return. And as we'll see, the tragedy behind the magic only deepens the tale.
The Little Prince, Part 3. The Little Prince feels timeless, like it could have been written in any century in any language. But in truth, it was born in one of the darkest times imaginable. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, the man behind the boy, was not just an author. He was a pilot, a real one. He had flown mail planes over the Sahara, dodged storms, survived crashes. His hands had gripped controls through fog and fire. And when World War II erupted, he carried more than letters. He carried the weight of a fractured world. By the early 1940s, Saint-Exupéry was exiled in America. France was occupied. Home felt far away. And here in New York, he began writing the strange little story of a boy and a rose. It's easy to forget this context when you're charmed by the drawings of sheep and foxes. But listen closely, and the war is everywhere. Loneliness in the desert, planes falling from the sky, the ache of dislocation, the child asking questions adults can't answer. And here's something people rarely notice. The Little Prince was written as a kind of farewell. Antoine knew he might not come back. His health was failing, his body exhausted by years of flying and injuries. Friends described him as melancholy, restless, carrying a shadow. The rose in the story? Most say she was inspired by his wife, Consuelo. Their relationship was stormy, full of passion and distance. He adored her, but they quarreled, they separated, they circled back again. She was beautiful, fragile, demanding, just like the rose. And yet, she was his.
essential. When he wrote of the prince tending her carefully, of being hurt by her vanity, of leaving but never forgetting, he wasn't just writing a fable. He was confessing, a letter in disguise. Imagine him, sitting in New York, sketching a small boy with golden hair, remembering the desert where he had once nearly died of thirst, remembering the woman he both loved and fled, remembering France, broken by war. This wasn't escapism, it was mourning. And then, July 1944, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry flew a reconnaissance mission over the Mediterranean. He never returned. His plane vanished. No body was found. No wreckage for decades. Just absence. Doesn't that sound familiar? A boy who appears suddenly in a desert and then disappears, leaving only memory? The author's fate rhymes with his characters. The little prince returns to the stars. Antoine never comes back from the sky. And so the book itself becomes a kind of ghost, a farewell note dressed as a children's tale. His last words to the world, wrapped in drawings and parables. When I first learned this, I couldn't read the book the same way again. Suddenly, every line carried extra weight. The loneliness wasn't just the prince's, it was Antoine's. The longing for innocence, the rose, the fox, they weren't just symbols. They were memories, love letters, grief. It explains the tone, doesn't it? Why it feels so gentle but also so sad. Why it whispers instead of shouts. It was written by a man who knew time was short, who knew he might never set foot in his homeland again. And maybe that's why the story stuck, because people can sense when something is written out of necessity, out of urgency, out of pain. The Little Prince is not polished propaganda. It's not escapist fluff. It's a cry, a soft one, but a cry nonetheless. And the tragedy deepens when you realize Saint-Exupéry's body of work, his essays, his memoirs, were full of the same themes: flight, loneliness, human connection, war. But none of them reached as far as this fragile little fable. None of them spoke to the world the way the prince did. Maybe because only here did he lower his guard enough to speak like a child.
And here's where it gets almost unbearable. He disappears into the sky. The prince disappears into the stars. Neither returns. And so we are left, readers, listeners, with only their words, their drawings, their absence. For me, this is where the book stops being just moving and starts being haunted. Because I can't help but hear the echo of a man saying goodbye. Not just to his rose, not just to his planet, but to us. And yet, isn't that also why it feels so alive? That's the paradox. A book born out of exile and despair becomes one of the most beloved, hopeful stories ever written. Maybe that's the miracle of literature. That grief, translated honestly, can nourish generations who never knew the man behind the pen. So here we are. The boy has learned from the fox. The author has poured his last hopes into the page. And the story, simple, strange, devastating, keeps traveling across oceans and decades. Next, I want to explore how it traveled so far. How a fragile tale of sheep and roses and foxes became one of the most translated, most beloved books in the world. Because the story's magic didn't end with its author. It kept walking, from country to country, into schools, into bedrooms, into the stars themselves. The Little Prince was published in 1943. Just a slim volume, illustrated with simple watercolors. It didn't look like much. And yet, within a few decades, it had become one of the most widely translated books in human history. Over 200 million copies, more than 500 languages and dialects. Statues of the Little Prince stand in cities across the globe. His words are carved into walls, whispered in classrooms, quoted at weddings, funerals, even political speeches. How did this happen? Why did this quiet little fable travel further than most epics? I think part of the answer lies in its simplicity. It's short, barely 100 pages, but every line feels polished, almost like poetry. You can read it in a single sitting, but the words keep echoing long after. And because it's so brief, it invites rereading. Each return uncovers something new, especially as you age. When you're a child, it feels like an adventure. When you're a teenager, it feels like a love story. When you're an adult, it feels like a confession. The same words shift shape as you do. Another reason? It doesn't preach. It whispers. The book never tells you what to think. It doesn't hammer lessons into your skull. Instead, it offers images. A fox who wants to be tamed. A rose with hidden thorns. A drunk lost in shame. A businessman counting stars. And it lets you draw your own conclusions. That gentleness is rare. And maybe that's why people lower their defenses when they read it. And then, there's the universality. This is not a French story or an American story. It's not bound to one religion, one culture, one ideology. It's about love, loss, loneliness, wonder. Every human being knows those things. A child in Brazil, a grandmother in Japan, a student in Egypt, a soldier in Poland. All can open this book and find themselves reflected. That's rare, very rare. It also helped that The Little Prince wasn't just printed. It was embraced. France made it a treasure. Schools began teaching it. Translations appeared in languages big and small, even in Braille. Plays were staged, operas composed, animated films produced. Merchandising followed. Yes, even this gentle little book became a brand. But somehow, the core message survived commercialization. And then there's the strangest part. The book literally went to space. In 2014, astronauts carried The Little Prince to the International Space Station, where it floated among the stars the prince once dreamed about. Imagine Saint-Exupéry hearing that. His little boy from asteroid B612 drifting among real galaxies. But maybe the most powerful reason this book spread is because it doesn't belong to one age group. It is both a children's story and not a children's story at all. Parents read it to their kids and weep silently while the kids laugh at the sheep. Teenagers pick it up and feel seen in their confusion. Adults return and realize, oh no, I became the businessman. I became the king. And the elderly, looking back at decades of love and loss, read it as a farewell letter.
Few books can shapeshift like that. Few can grow with you. And here's a smaller reason I don't want to overlook. It's beautiful. Not just the prose, but the drawings. Saint-Exupéry illustrated it himself. The watercolors are clumsy in places, almost childlike, but that's the point. They look like the kind of drawings a child would make if given paints and too much imagination. That style invites you in. It tells you, don't analyze too much. Just look. Just feel. And perhaps that's why the book doesn't just survive translation, it thrives in it. Even when the words change, the drawings remain. And those drawings say enough. Think about it. In an age of war, in a century of violence, a book about sheep and foxes became one of the most translated works of all time. That alone is astonishing. But what it proves is that the hunger for tenderness is global. The desire to be reminded of innocence, of love, of wonder. It doesn't matter what country you're from. That hunger is human. I sometimes imagine people in the 1940s, scarred by war, uncertain about the future, finding this little book in a shop or a library. Maybe they bought it for their children. Maybe they read it alone in bed. And maybe, for a moment, they felt less hopeless, less old, less disqualified from wonder. And then I think about people now. In our time of distraction, conflict, and exhaustion, the little prince is still there, still whispering, "Don't forget. Don't forget the fox. Don't forget the rose. Don't forget what is invisible." So yes, the little prince took over the world. Not with force, not with spectacle, but with whispers, with drawings, with a boy who never grows old. Next, I want to go deeper into what this book actually teaches about being human. Because it's not just about foxes or roses or asteroids. It's about us, about how we live, how we lose, and about the choice we face every day, to see with our eyes or with our hearts. At this point, you may be asking, what is The Little Prince really about? Is it about sheep? Foxes? A lonely boy from a distant planet? Not really. Those are just the clothing, the disguise. The truth of this book is much simpler and much heavier. It's about being human. Saint-Exupéry could have written a treatise, a manifesto, a book of philosophy about love and loss. But instead, he chose a fable, because some truths are too fragile to shout. They need to be whispered through story. So what does this story teach us? First, friendship. Real friendship. The kind that doesn't measure worth in usefulness or power or gain. The prince's bond with the fox is friendship distilled. It takes time, patience, a willingness to sit quietly, to show up day after day. That's how humans connect. Slowly, with trust, with risk. And isn't that exactly what we forget as adults? We network, we scroll, we skim through people like headlines. But the fox reminds us, if you want something real, you must give your time. You must allow yourself to be tamed. Second, the beauty of small things. In a world obsessed with grand gestures and big numbers, this book points to the opposite. A single rose, a single star, a single laugh. That's enough. That's where meaning hides. When the prince looks at fields of roses, he doesn't dismiss his own. He realizes she's special because of the mornings he watered her, the nights he shielded her from the cold, the hours he listened to her complaints. Love lives in the ordinary, and that ordinariness is sacred. Third, the ache of loss. The fox tells us plainly, if you let yourself love, you will cry. If you tame, you will mourn. But without that ache, without that risk, nothing has meaning. This is a brutal lesson, and yet it is the truth of being human. Every bond we form carries the seed of its ending. Every hello is also a future goodbye. The book doesn't hide this. It faces it gently and says, yes, it will hurt, but still, choose love. And finally, the choice to see with the heart, not just with the eyes. It sounds simple, maybe even sentimental. But think of how hard it really is. Our eyes are trained to compare, to evaluate, to judge. We look at appearances, status, possessions, the visible. And yet, the things that truly shape us, time, kindness, memory, devotion, can't be seen. One sees clearly only with the heart. What is essential is invisible to the eye. That's the book's refrain, its thesis, its gift. For me, it lands as both comfort and challenge. Comfort because it reminds me that the invisible things I cherish are real. The laughter of a friend, the warmth of a hand held, the invisible threads that tie me to those I love, those are essential, even if the world can't measure them. But also challenge, because it means I can't hide behind surfaces. I can't judge only with my eyes.
I must try to see deeper. And that's messy, risky. It demands vulnerability. And maybe that's why this book endures, because it doesn't just tell a sweet tale. It asks us, who have you tamed? Who have you allowed to tame you? What rose have you cared for? And what will you choose to see? With your heart or just your eyes? The little prince is lonely. Yes. He feels ache. Yes. But he is also brave. He dares to love a rose that might hurt him. He dares to tame a fox, knowing he will cry when they part. He dares to wander among adults and still choose wonder. That's courage. Quiet courage. The kind we forget exists. And maybe that's why people return to this book again and again. Not to escape, but to remember. To be reminded of something small and fragile inside themselves that the world has nearly crushed. So here's what I take away. Life is short. Love will hurt. But the only way to make it meaningful is to give yourself anyway. To water your rose. To listen to your fox. To let yourself be tamed. Even knowing the ache it brings. Because the alternative, the businessman counting stars, the drunk drowning in shame, the king with no subjects, that is not living. That is surviving. The prince chooses more, and maybe, so can we. In the end, this book doesn't promise a happy ending. It promises something better, a truthful one. A reminder that even if we vanish, as Antoine did, as the prince does, the love we gave remains. The invisible threads endure. And that is what it means to be human. Look, some books entertain, some books teach. But once in a while, a book feels like a companion. Like a friend who sits beside you when you're tired, when you're lost, when you can't quite explain what's missing in your life. For me, The Little Prince is that kind of book. It doesn't dazzle with plot. It doesn't impress with complexity. It doesn't need to. It speaks in whispers, in images, in moments. A sheep in a box, a rose with thorns, a fox asking to be tamed. And somehow, in those quiet fragments, it reaches further than most great novels ever do. Maybe you read it as a child and shrugged it off. Maybe you're hearing it for the first time now. Or maybe you've returned to it years later and suddenly it hits differently. However you come to it, the effect is the same. It lingers. I think about the rose sometimes, how fragile, how demanding, how irritating she can be. And yet, how essential. I think about the fox, willing to risk heartbreak for the gift of connection. And I think about the prince himself, lonely, but still brave enough to choose love. It leaves me asking questions I can't quite finish. Who are the roses in my life? Who are the foxes? Have I been willing to give them my time, my presence, my heart?
Or have I spent too long counting stars, chasing numbers, drowning in distraction? There's no tidy answer, no perfect balance, and maybe that's okay. Maybe the point isn't to solve it, but to remember it, to carry it, like the prince carried his rose. I suppose what I love most is that this book doesn't demand anything. It doesn't shout. It doesn't insist. It just says quietly, don't forget. Don't forget what it means to love. Don't forget what it means to see. Don't forget that what is essential is invisible. And if you remember that, just once in a while, maybe that's enough. So whether you're 9 or 90, whether you've lost count of how many times you've read this, or whether this is your first glimpse of the boy with golden hair, the little prince is waiting to remind you of something you already knew, something you might have forgotten. And maybe, just maybe, that's why it has lasted this long. Thank you for listening. And until next time, please, don't forget what it means to truly see.